Hey guys, welcome to episode 10 of the Straight Outta Prison podcast. I am James K. Jones, and this is my story.
And this is Haley Jones, and this is his story that has now become a part of my story.
So in episode 10, I'm about, 3.5 years in. We're titling this one Leaving B.C.I. because this will be the time that I've come to E.O.S, my sentence in the state of Florida. And I know you always look at me crazy when I say E.O.S. Like, what does that mean?
So E.O.S, stands for end of sentence.
End of sentence. So I knew I had an end of sentence in the state of Florida, July the 1st, 1996.
So just really quick, the last episode, something that stood out to me at the end was, like all of us, the time you went into prison, you were 20, right?
I was 20, yeah.
And so the whole time that you were there and adjusting and acclimating and then just being there, you really were mainly looking out for the number one, which is you.
Just me.
And making sure, and all the hustles and all the things we talked about was to make sure, and you even mentioned this, to make sure you were comfortable getting everything you wanted, you needed, as far as you could in that circumstance.
Absolutely.
But something at the end happened or that shifted your mindset a little bit. And I don't know if it was getting a taste of it or what, but just a shift in realizing there was some kind of gratification in doing things for other people.
That's so crazy that both of those things involve food.
Yeah.
And where I'm at today and the things, that's how I love people is through food.
It's true. And it shows for me.
We talked about in that last year that I was in the state of Florida, I orchestrated gourmet Thanksgiving dinner for the 1,000 men that were at B.C.I, and it just turned the compound upside down because they got a good, delicious Thanksgiving dinner. And,
this is just me interpreting your feelings from that, but something about that was very just gratifying. It almost made you want to do more of that or something like that.
Yes, I realized that life was about more than me. It wasn't about me getting mine. It was about, when you could, seek to do something to help other people, then you got yours and they got theirs. So it was a difference. And then that December that year, I moved back into the grad dorm, and I was so excited about that. And I was just, I guess kind of just overwhelmed with gratitude to be back there because that was the Cadillac of the dorms at B.C.I. And just coming together with just a couple other guys and saying, hey, let's do something different for Christmas this year. Let's don't have four of us gather in our little cells and have a tuna tang party. Let's do it for everybody. Let's do it for the whole dorm. And
let's do a roast beef tang party.
Oh, we did a roast beef tuna tang. Girl, I got it from the main kitchen. But it wasn't just that it was good, and it was good, but it was the seeing hope and value on the faces of the other inmates, because I'd been locked up that time by almost 4 years, and I never really cared about anybody else except for a select few. Just seeing that you could get outside of yourself, and it wasn't even really that much of an effort. It's to use the resources that I had available to me to make a difference in their lives, and what that did to them, and then in turn it blessed me. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool.
So you mentioned at the end of last episode, and this is where I want to pick up, is you started journaling, and this was important somehow.
It was part of my process. Part of me going back to D-Dorm was I had to have some kind of recovery-centered, I had to be doing some of that recovery nonsense stuff, in which I saw it as nonsense. It was stupid. It was nothing. It was not anything I wanted to be a part of or needed to be fooling with. But I did want to go back to D-Dorm where it was safe and clean and smelled nice, and I had people that I valued and cared about. And so I had a meeting with the new director, and we decided I'll just go do the NA classes. That's Narcotics Anonymous.
Yeah, you mentioned that last time, yeah.
So I signed up. That was once a week. You had to go up to the visiting park, and there was this free world guy that would come in and do these classes. And I remember
free will guy. What
free
is that?
World.
Free world, which means they were not in prison.
Yeah. Okay. That's another prison lingo. So you have inmates. You have the police
and the COs.
Police and COs is the same thing.
Okay.
And then you have free world people.
Okay.
Free will people are people that volunteer in prison.
Okay.
And they're most usually doing some kind of ministry, or either like kids that would come in that were doing they were like studying criminal justice or something. They needed some credit for their school or whatever. And they would look at you and ask you questions and all that stuff. But most free will people did like prison, like ministry or prison outreach or something where they were coming in for no reason other than to try to help you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I was skeptical of those people because they reminded me of the Free Will Baptist religious people I grew up with, and I didn't want anything to do with them. But because I had to have something to go back to D-Dorm, I chose the Narcotics Anonymous, and I'd come to a sobering reality like that last year before that. Just watching people come back to prison, it was so depressing. Like, and I would say, like, what are you doing? Like, is it the food? Did you miss the food? I mean, did you miss being locked up or being harassed or, you know, why can't you figure it out? Like, give me a shot. I would give anything to have a shot at getting out and trying to figure it out and not be here. But the sobering reality was that, you know, 7 out of 10 people come back to prison.
Yeah.
Within a year. And that's the national, like, average.
Yeah, we covered that last episode. I remember you saying that. That's crazy.
So that did something to me where I wanted to do something different so I could be in the graduate dorm, in the D dorm, with my people that I loved. But at the same time, there was another part of me that knew I needed something different. Like, I needed to figure out this thing. And my roommate, when I was first in prison, Valenza, we talked about him a couple episodes back. He was a guy, he was always into something new. He was like always studying some new thing. So he had got into Buddhism. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I mean, I've heard of it. I don't know much about it.
I mean, people say it's a religion. Like, now on the other side of that, I see that more. Like, some of that's like principles for living and stuff like that. But he had gotten like so hooked on reading these books, he would read them late into the night, and then he would like jump up and start telling me all about them. And then I would say, excuse me, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in none of that shit. Whatever you're saying, I don't care. Like, go tell it to somebody else. But he got hooked on this karma thing about karma. And so for him, karma was like whatever we put out into the universe, if it's positive, then we'll get good back. And if it's negative, we'll get evil things back. And it really started bothering me. And I never told him. That he was bothering me. But I started like coming to a place where I realized, my God, I've put out some bad things into the universe. I mean, nobody even knows some of the stuff I've done. Like, I've done so much like evil, like stuff. Like, no wonder all this, like,
no wonder you're in prison.
Prison, and then, you know, like, all this stuff keeps coming back at me. It's like, I've put out a lot of bad stuff. Like, I have not lived in a way that put out anything good. I mean, other than for my family. But, like, I'm just all about me. And so that kind of broke me down, like, started making me think there is more to life than getting away with stuff. Like, and it started changing the way I thought. And then, you know, I came to this reality that I got to do something different. And when I went to the NA class, I went in like, you know how I am. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to be 100% or I'm not going to do it. So I went in there, you know, 100%, like, I'm going to figure this out, blah, blah, blah. And I get in there, and this guy starts talking about his cocaine addiction and telling all the stories, and then everybody else is telling all their drug stories. And then I got to the end of the first sesh, and I was like, I was fine before I came here with you miserable people. Now I want to go get high. Like, I don't see how this could be helpful. But because it was what was going to keep me in the dorm, I kept going back. Not forever, but I did for a little while. But I think it was my second or third one, I went, and this guy, he gave us an assignment. He asked us to write a paper on what is truth. And I thought, well, that's simple enough. And I went back to my dorm, and I had a fresh little notebook. Actually, you're holding that notebook in your hand right now.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
I'd got that in a box from my mom. And I wrote that down, like, what is truth? And I couldn't answer that. I didn't know what that was. Like, I didn't know. I don't know. Truth is these the Florida Department of Corrections has me locked up. That's my truth. That's my
And
only
that was
truth.
the truth.
Well, and then they had this thing about what is God? What is God? Like, what's your higher power? And, they said your higher power can be like Jesus or Buddha or Mohammed or, God or the idea of God. Or, it could be a doorknob. So I was like, you people are idiots. Like, none of this stuff. Okay, so I said, my higher power is these crackers that have me locked up in the state of Florida that won't let me go home. That's the only higher power I can tell you about. But I started journaling that what is truth, and I never stopped. I mean, I still journal to this day, and this is 24 years later.
That's true. You literally have dozens and dozens of journals.
I do. And, some of them, I look through some of them now, like especially those during this time period. I'm like, man, I was evil. And I don't want my kids reading those. I don't know if I need to burn those or what I need to do those. Like some of the ones that come later, I'm good. But it was like a discipline and an exercise that helped me find some kind of hope and some kind of peace. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I have found some whacked out book by some like New Age person that was asking all these questions. And he'd ask you a question and then you had to answer them. And it was not like, you got to understand at that time, I was still an atheist. I didn't believe in any of that stuff. And I remember I was on the prison yard the next couple of weeks, and there was like a stream that was like a natural stream that ran through the prison yard. Mm-hmm. Like it was like water, water's going to go where it's going to go unless we stop it. So it was like this little natural stream that would go under the prison fences, and it would stream through, and it had like a little drain. And I was standing out there, and there was like 10 little frogs like jumping around the water. And I remember thinking, dumbass frog, what are you doing in prison? Like, don't you know you should be out in the free world? You're free. You can just jump through the gate. You don't even have to be here. And then I had this weird thought, like, how do the frogs know that they're supposed to follow the water? Like, how do they know that? And then it was like, almost like it was like orchestrated for me. Like there was some ducks like flying over us in like a V, where there was like a leader duck, and then there were like 5 on each side, and they were flying over, quack, 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 and they were going south or whatever they do. And I just like came to this like soul awakening moment where I realized this is all by design. Like there's no way that there couldn't be some kind of being that created the universe. For me to be standing here in prison in Brevard County, Florida, watching the frogs and the birds and all the things, like, and don't get me wrong, like I didn't like have a come to Jesus or come to Muhammad or come to Buddha. I just like realized like there's something bigger than me, and I don't understand it, but I want to understand it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you mean how the ducks knew to fly in that formation?
Yeah, it's like nature.
Yeah.
Nature. Like, it was like, this is not all random. I'd studied science, and, we come from algae and the monkeys and all that nonsense. And, if you're going to be a criminal and do what you want to do, that's the easy thing to, like, believe in. Because then I'm an animal, too. I can do whatever as long as I win. But, like, in retrospect, I see that as, John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, in the last, the 19th century. He said that before you can like change, you have to have a soul awakening moment. And that was like he believed that was his doctrine, that was his experience, because he grew up real religious and he changed later on. But that was my soul awakening moment where I realized, like, and don't get me wrong, I didn't change anything other than like an awareness. There's something bigger than me, and I don't believe it's the Free Will Baptist God or the Baptist or the Pentecostal or any of that nonsense, but there's something out there, and I need to like tap into that and figure that out. And that was what journaling, I guess after that was what journaling did for me. Like I began and I didn't share it with anybody. I didn't have anybody coaching me. It was just me and my thoughts and my paper and my pen.
Did that feel safe for you?
I don't know if it felt safe, but it was like there was a knowing that was what I was supposed to be doing right then. Mm-hmm. And it did something in me that I hadn't had in almost 4 years, was that I started to have hope that I could have a future, and that there was like I don't know, some kind of destiny for me. There wasn't this like prison life and this pain and all the stuff that I was seeing in front of me. And it began to change the way I acted. It changed the way I treated people. And honestly, in retrospect, it was the first time as an adult I ever had a conscience. Because,
Wow.
I mean, it's true. I mean, before that, I could do anything. I remember Riggs, a guy that was in my dorm. He told me once I got some bad news about, I may have a detainer. And I remember him coming to me and saying, he's like, Jones, you're a good kid. You're a good kid. The good things are coming for you. You're a good kid. And I remember looking at him and thinking, I'm not good. Because I would stab you in your back and I would do anything if it helped me advance my agenda. And I remember just like, but I think that was part of the process for me too, was like accepting that I was evil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I was. I'm not saying I was all evil, but my foundation, my motivations were evil. And journaling helped me start to examine like my motives and where I was and what I was doing and what my future was going to look like. And it's so interesting to go back and read that stuff now because, I mean, on one hand, it's like I look at like the journal that you're holding in your hand now. I look at that and I think I don't ever want Lula Mae to read that because the things that I said in there were so harsh and not like anything she knew.
But also, it's just so incredible. I mean, this on the flip side of that, just it's so neat that you do have these because, I mean, I would never believe that you were that person, but obviously you were. I mean, this is like your handwriting.
You didn't know me.
Right. But that it's kind of like this tangible reminder of where you were and where you are now. And I think we forget, I mean, all of us, whatever our story is, we are some type of person or in some place.
We're
and
all
then gradually we move out into another, but we almost forget.
Yeah, we're all in process. Even like you grew up in a beautiful home with beautiful parents and church, all the things, like everything. You had to go through a process.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you had this, what did you call it? A moment of soul awakening.
A soul awakening moment.
A soul awakening moment. Okay. So you had that soul awakening moment, but also you've mentioned, which I want to kind of transition to, you preparing or knowing that your E.O.S. or end of sentence was coming.
So at this time I had like 6 months to my E.O.S. date.
Okay.
So we still had all this stuff in all these other counties, in Alabama and all the stuff that was like out there, but they hadn't like come to get me or bother. And I had a lawyer. I mean, they're public defenders, so they don't care. But they like file motions for them. If you want to get him, like do what you need to do. And so I had convinced myself that maybe they're just going to forget about all that other stuff I did and just let me go home because I have an EOS date. So my struggle at this time was like threefold. Am I going to go home to Alabama where my mama is? And I wanted to, but I knew I didn't want to just for her.
Just to clarify, though, you were thinking that you were leaving prison for good.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. No. I felt like, it had been 3.5 years. If they hadn't come and got me, why would they even fool with me now?
Right, okay.
So, and then I had, like, hope, like, other inmates and people would tell me, like, sometimes they just say he went to prison in Florida and just let that be it and be done with it. Like, they don't even want to fool with it. So I had that, the journal you're holding in your hands that started out, I said I had 148 days left in prison.
Yeah.
So, and I was counting down. the days. So my only struggle at that time was what's going to be next. So for me, it was go home to Alabama to where Mama was. And I wanted to be with her because I wanted to help her feel better. But at the same time, I don't want to live in Alabama. I had this plan with Valenza to move to Miami and start a restaurant. And his mom and his family had welcomed me to come. Like, we had the plan. Everything was set for that, so I could go to Miami. Or I could do what I'd always wanted to do, was move back to Atlanta to where my grandparents were and my dad's side of the family. And it was like a struggle, like, what's it going to be? And then I settled on, I'm going to Atlanta. I need to be with my family. I need to be with my granny. I need to be with the last stability that I ever had in my life was when I was 10 years old, at my granny's, and my mom coming in and telling me we're moving to Alabama. And just being there, like, she told me with no notice. It was, we're moving to Alabama, like, and we're leaving today. And I'm like, I'm 10 years old, but I'm like, the hell are you talking about? Like, this is summertime. I'm with my granny and my Aunt Glennis and my granddaddy. Like, I'm at 6425 Newborn Drive, College Park, Georgia, where everything is good, where, we eat dinner and everything's wonderful.
Because that was always your safe place.
That was my
for him.
stable place.
Yeah.
That was my only stable place as a child. And then just my granny, telling me, you got to do whatever your mama says. She's your mama. And I remember her driving me and my mom.
Real quick, she told you and you left on the same day?
Within hours. Like, I had no notice. I had nothing. It was the second day after the last day of school. Like, I had nothing. It was just, we're moving to Alabama. Pack your stuff. And I remember my granny drove us to the bus station in Hateville, Georgia. That's where Chick-fil-A comes from. The original Dwarf House. And waiting on the bus to come and getting on the bus with my mom. And I couldn't stop crying. And my granny's crying. My Aunt Glennis, who is really like a sister to me. She was only like 6 years older than me, but she was like a late in life child for my grandparents. I think they had her in their 40s. Mm-hmm. Then we got on the bus. And I remember getting on the bus and I couldn't stop crying. And then the bus is leaving. It was like I just knew we're going to hell. We're not going anywhere good. And getting out on the highway outside of Atlanta, and I looked out the side of the bus and I saw my granny and I saw my aunt in the car waving at us because they love me. And just like, I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stop crying. And my mom was like, look, I can tell him to stop the bus. You can get off the bus and you can go with your granny. And I was like, okay, tell him to pull over. And then my mama started crying. Well, you're all I got in the world and all that stuff. And just realizing at the age of 10 years old that I had to choose whatever it was going to take to help her be happy. But leaving the only stable place I'd ever had, ever in my life, was my grandparents' house, to go to Alabama. Why would I go back there? Why would I want to go back there? And then I liked the adventure part of moving to Miami and starting a restaurant and a catering company. But, like, I knew Valenza. Like, I'd known him for years. He was probably one of my best friends I've ever had. But, like, sometimes he believes more than what is reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I made up my mind, I'll go visit him, but I'm moving to Atlanta. I'm moving with my granny. And then telling her that, telling my grandfather that, and just their excitement and just like, we want you here. Like, this is where you belong. Like, you should have never left here. And then my granddaddy getting on the phone and just telling me he was retired. And, little did I know he only had 2 years left to live. Just him getting on the phone and telling me, son, I can't wait for you to be here with me. And just like, he hated me when I was growing up, so I'm like, what was the big change? But I realized, later on as an adult, I realized he didn't like kids. He liked babies and adults. Like, kids got on his nerves. But I mean, he always loved me. He provided for me. And so I decided I was going to Atlanta. That was that was what I was going to do. And I was set. Like, I was doing my little journals and doing all my things. But then somewhere around about, I guess it was about March or April of 1996, I remember that when they called you somewhere, like if it wasn't important, they would have somebody come and get you or have your dorm officer say, you need to go see so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. But if they called you over the loudspeaker, which they didn't use the loudspeaker much because the loudspeaker went across the whole compound, which was like 20, 30 acres. If they called you over the compound, it was serious. And I remember just being so full of hope. And, I got I think I was like at 112 days then. And I was just so excited. I could taste freedom. Like I could taste it. I could feel it. And the future is mine. I can do whatever. And Inmate Jones, number 566401, report to the classification officer, classification office immediately, which meant something's up. And just that walk from my dorm, like it was like a 4-block walk, but just like that walk that day, like feeling the sun beating down on me, like feeling like I could taste freedom, but then the dread that just covered me because knowing they're not calling me up there for some little nice thing. Something happened. Like there's something going on. And then, like when I opened the door, my classification officer, she was like 195 years old. She was mean, and she was always like in my corner, but she was like the mean aunt.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
She was for me, but like, and I knew she was for me. She was like my person, but she was not nice. But that day she had like this sad, nice look on her face, like she was like genuinely like trying to reach out to me, and like I think she came around her desk and put her hand on me. You know, just
Well,
like
you know that's not good.
she never did that before. Like there was
Right.
never any of that happening when I went to meet with her. And then she sat down behind her desk and she said, "I just need to tell you, I just need to prepare you. I know you only got a couple months left, but you have a detainer on you in Montgomery, Alabama." And so I was like, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, that means you're not going home. That means when you E.O.S your sentence, that day when you E.O.S your sentence, they'll come pick you up and they'll take you to Montgomery."
To be in prison there.
Not prison.
Or,
So I'm starting over the county jail thing all over
oh,
again.
wow. Okay.
So you don't just go to prison. You have to go through county jail. You have to be sentenced. You have to go through the process. So basically everything I've been through for the last 3.5 years, I'm fixing to start over again in another state. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it was just, I was sick. Like, it just made me sick. Like, and now in hindsight, I'm like, why didn't I already know that? Like, why didn't anybody prepare me for that? But, we stayed in contact with the public defenders and tried to keep, my Aunt Sue, she was working that angle, and they never came and got me. So, but what they do is if you're in prison somewhere and they know you're going to be there for the next 3 years, they're like, well, let's just let them get finished with that, and then we'll see what happens after
Right.
that.
You're not top priority to figure out.
Yeah. So that was a reality that just, like, brought me back down to earth again. And, I mean, that was tough.
My gosh. So then you had to so after you had told your granny and your grandfather you were going there,
Yeah.
then you had to call and tell them you weren't going there, I guess.
Well, I think I called my mom first, and I just remember by that time, my mom had gotten to a place where she was, like, at peace with me being where I was, and she knew I was okay, and I'd learned not to tell her anything negative. I only told her positives. I'm learning how to be a man. I'm learning how to, and part of that was true. I mean, I was learning things, but calling her and telling her, I'm not coming home, and just the pain. It was like, going through that, being arrested all over again, and just hearing her, she would scream and wail, and I mean, if I could get around that part of it, like, I could have did anything, but just that part of it was just that was just the worst, like, dealing with somebody else's pain, not my pain, but like somebody else's pain, and then having to call my granny and tell her, I thought that I was getting out, I thought that I was coming there, but looks like I'm not going to be. My granny was not quite as dramatic as my mom. My granny would be like, she would get upset, but then say, everything's going to work out. Everything happens for a reason, blah, 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 all that. And it was just very painful to tell them that. And then part of that shocked me was if you genuinely cared about somebody that was in prison when they got close to their E.O.S date, you celebrated it. You're going to make it. You're going to do it. You're going to be all that. And then having to go back in my dorm and telling all my friends, I'm not going home. And just, I remember, this is so dramatic, but I remember that night, Big O coming in my room and sitting by me and playing a Tupac song. Ooh, child, keep your head up. Things are going to get easier. And he wrote me like 100 notes. It said, Jones, keep your head up. You're bigger than this. Everything's gonna be all right. But it was almost like a death sentence then after that. I mean, I kept myself busy with my work and all the stuff I was doing in the kitchen, but it was hard. And then
That's a big blow, though. I mean, that's a huge blow, especially if you think, you're gonna be out and free, and then you're gonna have to literally redo.
Well, I was making my plans. Like I was set. Like everything I need to do, whatever I need to do, let's go do it. But there was I had to face the truth. I had to process the reality. I'm not going home. I'm going to face the music in Alabama. And I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know anything.
Right.
I didn't know anything about Alabama.
Once again, I mean, I feel like that's how it was. I mean, it sounds, honestly, the whole process sounds very exhausting. Just the idea of you just do not know what you're walking into.
But during that process, when I would journal, I found hope. Like there was some kind of hope that came out of me. But it didn't
even after you found out.
Yeah, but it didn't come from it didn't come from the house. It came from the inside. And I don't know. I didn't know where it was coming from, but I was just like, I know I'm gonna be all right. Like whatever I got to do, we're gonna figure it out, and I'm gonna be all right. You know, it's gonna be all right. And then I was reading all these books and stuff, but then I think it was about that time I had a friend. I'm not gonna say his name. His last name was Shia, and I don't know if you notice when I talk about like other inmates, unless they had a nickname, you called them by their last name. Like nobody went by their first name. Like I was inmate Jones. Nobody called me James or Keith or any of my JJ, any of my nicknames.
Well, I've noticed that even when you're retelling stories, that it's only the last name they're using or have used.
Well, that's what you call people.
Yeah.
So I was inmate Jones. So there was a kid that came to work with us in the main kitchen, and he took over like the stock room. His name was his last name was Shia, inmate Shia. I just called him Shia. He was younger than me. I think he was on like 19 or 20, but he was just this kid that was like full of life. Like he had a different kind of life, but it was like a light almost. And he didn't smoke. He didn't drink coffee. He didn't cuss.
He didn't drink coffee.
No, he didn't do anything. He didn't get involved in any of the nonsense that went on in prison life. And then, I found out later he was like married and had a little baby. And I forget, he had some kind of anger problem or something that got him in prison. But I became very close with him, and he liked to work out, and I was trying to work out because my goal was to be able to do pull-ups before I left prison. Because everybody, like, if you could do pull-ups, you were strong. And I could never do a pull-up, so I was weak.
I love these classifications. Like, you can do a pull-up, you're strong. You can't, you're weak.
Well, no. Have you ever tried to do a pull-up?
I have. It is very hard. I feel like I could at some point in my life do one. I don't know that for sure because I can't remember, but they're very difficult.
He was this kid that I don't even know where he came from and how I got close to him. But I remember right before I left, him telling me, one day, I'm going to tell people that I knew you win. And I was like, when what? when I was in prison in Florida, I mean, because I know 1,000 people that could say they knew me when. But he was, I guess, what you would call spiritual person. Like, he would try to talk to me about Jesus and all stuff, and I was like, I don't believe in all that. Like, so, like, you can go ahead and bypass me with any of that. And then, but he would, he was not religious. Like, he wouldn't try to, like, preach to me or anything, but he would just, like, try to live it in front of me. And so it was odd. And I guess the odder thing was that I liked him. Like, and I trusted him. He was a good guy, and we were good friends. But he, I guess, kind of awakened something. Like, I was like, whatever he's got, like, I might could do that. I mean, I can't do the religious thing. But whatever he's got, I mean, maybe I could do that. And then, but he would, like, always want to talk to me about stuff. And then I'd be like,
what stuff?
Like deep. Like, oh, let's talk about deep spiritual. I'm like, I'm not a deep spiritual person. I don't care about all that. But he never gave up on me. Like, he was, till I left. I mean, I lost touch with him, actually, after that. Actually, to be honest, that's been 24 years ago, and I haven't thought about him until I read this notebook preparing for this podcast.
Wow. But
he definitely had influence on me. But there was fear, there was uncertainty, there was all the, nagging, like, this is never going to be over. And then somewhere there was, like, inside of me, there was some kind of hope. Does that make sense?
I mean, it does and it doesn't. Because
I didn't have a reason to have hope.
Right, exactly.
But there was some kind of a weird hope. I don't know how to explain it. It was weird. And then there would be, like, I remember this was about the time, I remember coming back from work, because, like, I kept my practice of coming back early while everybody was out and taking a shower and taking a nap and all the things. And I remember there was a piece of paper laying on the table in the day room, and I picked it up, and it was like something different about this paper. It was like the words jumped off at me. I can't explain it. It was like the words just like penetrated me. I'd never had anything like that happen to me before. And I was like, what's happening? This was, a month before I left. And I remember picking up the paper and trying to read it and understand what it was saying. It was some kind of Bible study. And I remember when I realized, like, there was, like, an address for a chapter and verse, like, oh, yeah, I'm not into that bullshit. Like, like, whatever that is. And I threw it down, and I walked up the stairs to go into my room, and then I thought, you need to keep that. And I turned around, walked back down, and got it, and took it back with me. And there were several times, like, little things like that would happen that didn't make any sense, that I honestly I don't believe in any of that stuff. Like, any of that, like, that's not I want nothing to do with that. I had enough of that when I was a kid. Never again. But it was just an odd time. It was like something was preparing me for something, and I didn't know what it was.
So you knew you had the, E.O.S.
Mm-hmm.
End of sentence. But now you knew you were going to Montgomery, Alabama.
Yeah, they put
to
a hold
restart the whole process, to go
Whole
to jail,
thing.
get sentenced, all the things.
Started over.
So was there any other like preparation from the jail side that they gave you to leave before you leave there, I guess? Leave that world into another world, or that city into another city?
See, up until that point in 1996, in the state of Florida, they would have, they called it pre-release classes. That meant it's kind of like the drug dorm. It was nonsense. It was just something they did to check a box.
Did you watch the comedy show in that class?
No, I never made it there.
Oh, you never made it.
You were supposed to do it like, you're supposed to do your pre-release classes like 2 weeks out.
Okay.
And then they would like, I think I had helped with that when I was working with the drug program. They would like show you pictures of like sexually transmitted diseases, and if you have sex without a rubber, you're going to grow cauliflower on your wiener, and just all
James, it's like...
No, that's what they were teaching us.
Okay, but it's like middle school, but you don't have to... I mean, they teach that kind of stuff when they first start literally, they're like, let's go back to middle school education. Except...
Well, you might need that if you're in prison. And we were kids. I mean, we were youthful offenders. So that was what was supposed to happen. But around March, April, May, I can't remember exactly when, they changed their strategy. So there's a thing in prison called jamming your time. I don't know if you've ever heard. Have you ever heard me say jamming your time?
No.
So jamming your time means I have an E.O.S. sentence. I have an E.O.S. in July of 1996, but I had good time. So you get a certain amount of good time for not getting in trouble. Does that make sense?
So you were good.
Well,
you were
okay.
a good prisoner, whatever.
I was a medium prisoner. I got in a little bit of trouble, not too much. I had a 6-year sentence in the state of Florida. So that was my sentence. I served 3.5 years to get to my E.O.S.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that means I had 12 plus 6, 18 months of good time. So every month you would get good time. Like if you did good, you didn't get in trouble, or like you got a GED, or you completed the drug program, or you did well at your job, or whatever, you could get good time for all that. So I had 18 months of good time.
Okay.
So, but if I got within 2 months of leaving and I got in a fight or something happened, then they could take that. So good time was a privilege, but it could be taken from you.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's like they gave it to you, but if you did something to mess it up, they could take it back.
Got it.
So the term jamming your time was other inmates know when you're getting close to your E.O.S. date. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And if you had enemies or people that hated you or people that just were haters and didn't want you to go home, they could start trouble with you to jam your time.
Oh, that's terrible.
I mean, that was normal. It happened. So most people, their last couple months, they were paranoid and they would lay low and they didn't care. And, I'm just trying to go home. I don't care about nothing that's happening in here. But the Florida Department of Corrections came up with what they call like a reentry program. Mm-hmm. And they said, we're going to pull them 30 days out. We're going to quarantine them from the program, from the compound, which means that we were still in prison, we were still at B.C.I., but they were going to take us out of our surroundings and put us in a special population. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And they that last 30 days, what we would do was go to class. Like, they were doing everything they could to prepare us to be successful on the other side.
Okay.
Which sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. But if you're me and you live in D-dorm and you have a sweet roommate and a sweet cell and a sweet, job and everything worked out, you don't want to do none of that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So when they came out with that thing, I went to my boss man, Sergeant Merkelinger. We called him Sergeant Merk, short for Merkelinger, and told him, this is what they say they're doing. And he told me, Jones, don't worry about that. Like, I need you here, and you're doing a great job, and we got to get somebody trained, and I would never let you get pulled out to go do that. And I believed him because he was a sarge, they're higher upper.
Yeah.
But he assured me that, that wasn't going to happen to me. And it might happen to somebody else, but it wasn't going to happen to Inmate Jones. I mean, even though it was a big uproar on the compound because they weren't just quarantining us from the compound, they were putting us in M dorm, which is an open bay dorm, which meant we would go from living in 2-man cells to living in one room with like 80 other people.
Ugh.
Which was like going back to L dorm where we started.
Right.
Remember me talking about when I got there and I was
Yeah.
in L dorm?
I mean, it's a lot of letters, but yes, I know.
Well, M dorm was the same as L dorm, but they used that as a disciplinary thing. Like if you got in trouble, they sent you to M dorm to like figure it out.
Okay, I got it. So the question is, did you go?
He promised me that I would not go.
Right.
And I was convinced that I would not go. I was pretty much running the kitchen. Like, I was an inmate, and I knew I was an inmate, and they knew I was an inmate, but we had made so many changes and positive, like, moves that I had instituted, and I might have been, inflating my own importance, but the food that we were putting out then was 1,000 times better than the food we were putting out when I got there.
Right.
Does that make sense? And I knew I was needed. And it's like they call that in prison, they call it an institutional need. So you might have a protocol that says I need to go to pre-release, but there's an institutional need for him to be in the kitchen until he trains somebody. So the institutional need trumps programs.
Okay.
And that was in Florida and Alabama. So he convinced me that I was an institutional need and I would not be going to the pre-release program. But then came that day, about 35 days out, when they call my name. And when they call your name in prison, and they tell you, this is what they say. I'm sorry that I'm cussing like in this, but I'm trying to put myself back where I was when I'm trying to put myself back in. And I've been reading my journals and trying to remember. They would say, pack your shit. That meant there ain't nothing to talk about. Pack your shit. You're going somewhere. And so they told me that I was going to the pre-release program. It was me and like 50 other people. And like we were in an uproar. Like it was on an afternoon. And I remember there were at least 3 guys in my dorm that cried that day because I was leaving. And it was so sudden, and there was no...
And you thought you weren't going?
No, I was convinced. Sarge had told me I wouldn't. And I asked if I could go talk to my boss, to Sarge, and they let me go talk to Sarge. And then he sat me down. He, like, pulled me in his office. And I had been working for him by this time, like, 2 years. And he had, like, a staff of, like, 8 people. And he had, 30 inmates that worked for him. And he sat me down, and he said, look at me, Jones. He said, I've been doing this for like 25 years. I've never had an inmate come through here that has done the job that you've done for me. And no matter what happens next, I want you to know that I appreciate you and I'm thankful for you. And you've made a difference here. And I don't know, but he wasn't like the gusher. He wasn't like one of those people that would talk like that. But he let me know like I had value, and it changed something. I mean, for him to talk to me like that. And I remember Miss Clark was so upset that I was leaving, and then there was another officer, Fletch, that worked in there. Like I worked closely with him. He ran like the lunch service or whatever, and his wife would make me food and send it to me. And he told me this day, he said, I want you to remember The only difference between me and you is that you got caught, okay? You're a good man, and you have a future. And I was devastated, like, to be ripped out, because I thought, I had another month or so before I left, and I didn't want, like, my routine upset, because you get in a routine in prison, and when they upset your routine, they can rip everything away from you, and you just have to, like, figure it out. And that happened often. But I had a pretty good setup there.
Wait, so could Sergeant Merckx, is that his name?
Yeah.
He just couldn't get it done? Did he not have the power, or because he had promised you that you weren't
It came
go?
from up high. Like, they had said, like, the difference between, like, the Florida Department of Corrections, especially the youthful offender prisons, their number one goal was, we're going to rehabilitate you. We want you to get out and do something with your life. We don't want you to be a criminal. We don't want to have to lock you up again 5 years from now and send you to Florida State Prison or some max camp. So this came from Too High. Like, it was a program, I found out later, they had been working on that for a long time, and it was just time to implement it. And I got caught up in it. And I didn't want to go. And I thought it was nonsense. It was another, drug program. We're going to be watching Def Comedy Jam again. And I was going, maybe The Color Purple could get in there or some movie that I cared about. But it was across the board. And it wasn't just me, like Mud, that had been my roommate. He got caught up in that. And he was a maintenance guy. Like, he fixed everything on the compound. He was way more important than me. He got caught up in it. Like, it couldn't be stopped. We're going to do it. But the thing about that in prison, they don't give you notice. Like, it's just, today you live here, you have the surroundings, and tomorrow you live somewhere else. And
I mean, it's exactly like what happened to you when your mom told you were moving to Alabama from Atlanta.
I hadn't thought about that. It was very similar.
Exactly.
It was very similar. But it was hard. And M-Dorm didn't have air either. They had fans. They didn't have air. Like at B.C.I, our rooms had AC in it, and the day room had AC in it, but M-Dorm had only fans, and it was July. Or June. It was June.
It's like they wanted you to suffer before leaving or something.
No, they had a purpose, and I would learn what the purpose was later on. They didn't want you to get your time jammed up because you would be quarantined. Like, you would have no contact with anybody else in the compound for the remaining time, and then they marched us off to class every day. And the classes were actually good. I mean, there's some stuff that I even use to this day that I learned during those classes. Like, remember the round to it?
Yeah.
So they gave us these round little pieces of wood that said TUIT on it, to it. And then they said, most people are going to make a change in their life when they get around to it. And then they were like, we just want to go ahead and give you the round to it so you can go ahead and do your thing. And then tons of resources. I still have some of them. I think I have most of those still that I still use to this day, and I've used with other, like, people coming out of prison. That Teddy Roosevelt quote that we have in our office about, it's not the critic who counts, it's not the one who points out where the strong man stumbled or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. It's the one who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who knows the great enthusiasm that fights, and and even if he fails, at least his place will never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat. I learned that in there.
Yeah.
So the classes were good. It was hard to be in that because you were, like, jammed in with 50 other guys. And, again, you're back in where you got 3 toilets and everybody's looking at you use the bathroom. And then you have a shower where everybody's showering together and all that nastiness and nonsense. But it was what I had to do, so I sucked it up and did what I had to do.
Well, I guess the saving grace there is that you're at the finish line.
I did, but it was like, I'm not going out easy. Like, I got to suffer on my way out. And I guess it was bothering me that I had to do this because I'd watched people for the last 3 years not have to go through any of that. They stay in their room till it's time to go, and then they just leave. But this was what they decided needed to be. And it really did help me later on. But it was hard. But so here I am. I had been on this compound for 3 years. I had 1994, 1995, 1996. I never left there. I never went anywhere. Some people left for, like, to go to, like, a court or county jail. some people left for medical stuff, which was, God forbid that ever happened, because the medical stuff down there was a trip. I had a friend of mine, Sims, who tore his foot up. They were wrestling or something, and he tore a ligament in his foot. They sent him off to medical. He came back 3 months later, limping on a cane, and like they had, his foot looked like something you would see on like a Frankenstein, where it was like a long cut with like stitches the other way, and they basically cut his foot up and tried to fix it, but they didn't. Does that make sense?
Oh.
It was awful. And then his foot would like push out bones. Oh, anyways, I digress. Like, you didn't want to have medical problems in prison. Like, you did not want any of that, and I never did, so that was a good thing. But my last days that I was in Florida were spent in the M dorm and the reentry program, quarantined from the rest of the compound. If we went anywhere, they marched us together with like security, and it was just something new they came up with. I don't even know if they're still doing that, but it was a real thing then. If we went to eat, they marched us down. We did it by ourselves, and then they took us back. But then I think it was maybe the last week that I was there, they were marching us down to go to commissary, and I saw Big O, like, across the field, and he was, like, frantically, like, hollering at me, and he was telling me to go to chapel. And I was like, go to chapel? Like, I ain't going to chapel. What are you talking about? And he was like, no, you know what I'm saying? They can't stop you from going to chapel. That's your constitutional right, because he was into all that law stuff. And so I got back, and I asked, like, did they let us go to chapel? And they were like, they do chapel call every time there's a chapel. They just march you down there. And honestly, I had been there for 3 years. I'd never been to chapel. Like, I'm not going. I mean, now there were some benefits to chapel. The chapel people had cards. Like, if it was Mother's Day, birthday, you could go in there, like, during yard hours and grab a card. But you didn't have to talk to them. They didn't preach at you, none of that stuff. So that was the only time I'd ever been to chapel. And I'd been there forever. I mean, I'd been there for 3 years. And I found out that they couldn't stop me from going to chapel. So he had told me that he would meet me at chapel that night. And then Shia ended up meeting me there too. So when they said chapel call, I put on my clean blue shirt and I marched myself down to chapel. Now, it was like at night, so you had to have extra security. I remember going in there, and it was kind of full. I mean, the chapel would hold like maybe 200 people. I mean, nobody went to chapel that I knew. Big O did, but he would always say he was spiritual, whatever that meant. I would always just say, okay, whatever that means. But we went to chapel that first time, and I was so excited to see him because I was missing everybody. Like, I knew Mud. Mud was in my little re-entry group, but I didn't know anybody else. So I didn't have anybody that was, like, cared to even associate with. And I was so excited to see him. And Big O was on one side of me. Shia was on this side of me. And I was trying to talk to him. And the guy got up and started doing his little sermon. And then I just kept talking. And they, like, I came to sobering reality with them. Like, y'all want me to stop talking so I can listen to this guy preach? Like... But they did. I mean, that's what they wanted to happen. And it actually aggravated me to the core that I had to sit there and listen to this preacher man. But it ended up being a pretty good message. Like, he was a real person. Like, he wasn't like a preacher or a Free Will Baptist man telling me I was going to hell. He was just talking about his relationship with Jesus. And even though I didn't believe in that, I was like, well, obviously he believes it. So
good for him.
No, I mean, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
But then after that, I went to chapel every time I could. But I only had I think I had a week left. And then my last night there was Sunday, June the 30th, 1996. And it was a Sunday night, so there was a big chapel. Big chapel was on Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. And so I made plans, like, I'm going to go. And, like, I had passed some notes and was, like, telling everybody, come to chapel. It's my last night, you know. I'm leaving in the morning, and it was like a bon voyage kind of farewell kind of thing. Like, if it wouldn't have been for the stupid reentry program, we would have been having tuna tang in the dorm, and everybody would have been giving me a big send-off, and I would have went off out of prison. But because of this, I couldn't do that. So It was Sunday night, went to chapel. We had a uniform that we had to wear. Our uniform was blue pants, shoes tied up, belt, blue shirt tucked in. You could wear a T-shirt under it. But on the weekends, we could just wear a T-shirt, a white T-shirt. And that was like the protocol. That was what it was. Mm-hmm. And that was what everybody did, because you didn't want to wear your out shirt because it was like a crisp, like fabric was real stiff, and it was just aggravating. Like, you wouldn't wear that if you didn't have to.
Right.
So on the weekends when we didn't have to wear our uniform, everybody just wore their T-shirts. But the reentry thing that I was in, they made us always, if we left the dorm, we had to be like, shirts and everything. So we marched down there, and there is everybody that I knew was there to tell me goodbye. And they were lined up, walking in the chapel, and we had, I wonder if I should say, I'll just say what we called them. New officers, we called them new cocks, because they were cocky and rude, and they were by the book, and everything was what it was supposed to be, and there was no getting around anything. So we march into the chapel, and then everybody that I knew from B.C.I. that I had been there with that weren't already gone was there to tell me bye and, see me at this chapel service. They all had on white T-shirts because it was Sunday night. And when they got to the door, he told them, "You can't come in, you don't have your shirt on." He was a new cop officer. And I remember just like knowing, I'm not going to get to tell anybody bye. Like, I'm not going to be like, this guy's like enforcing this rule. It wasn't even a rule, because on the weekends you could wear your T-shirts, but he was enforcing some rule that if you come to chapel service, you have to have on your blue shirt. So in order for them to get in the chapel, they had to go run all the way back to the dorms, through the door, into the pod, up to their rooms, put on their shirts, tuck it in, come back and get in. But the way chapel services work in prison is they open the doors, because it's not like a mandatory thing, it's a voluntary thing. Open the doors, you come in, and they lock the doors. If you come in, they lock the doors, you're locked in until they unlock them. And if you don't make it in time to get through the doors, you don't come in. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I was my last night in prison in B.C.I., locked in a chapel by myself with nobody that I cared about.
Aww.
And just like, how is this happening? Like, this sucks. Like, I hate this place. Like, I hate everything about it.
I hate prison.
No, but it was like I was trapped. And then, but I was also very sad. Like, I wanted to tell people bye.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to see my friends. Like, I mean, I didn't have like 50 friends, but I have 7 or 8 guys that I had grown close to. And in prison, it's kind of like that brotherly love thing. Like that maybe like people in the military have for each other.
Yeah.
You get that for each other because you're fighting through something together.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say bye.
Yeah.
I wanted them to know that I was okay and I was going to figure it out and everything was going to be beautiful. But I was trapped in the chapel and they were locked out and they couldn't even tell me bye. And I was just devastated. Like, this is bullshit. Like, now they got me trapped in the chapel, and then they got this preacher walking up here, and I'm going to have to listen to him tell me how bad I am, I'm going to hell and all stuff. And I just like, I ain't ready to hear all this. And the guy got up there, and he was like, "All right, so I had a sermon prepared for this evening." And he was like he was like ultra religious person. He said, "But I feel like the Lord put on my heart to play this video." And I was like, well, that's better than listening to you talk. And he like started this video, and I remember this guy coming on and saying that he had did like 10 years in prison. And I thought, I could hear what he's talking about. Like, I can listen to him. Mm-hmm. But I was so like callous and rude and arrogant, and I couldn't see. So I like reached into where all the hymnals were, where they would sing their little hymns and their Amazing Grace and all that stuff. And I stacked up like, gosh, it must have been like 10 hymnals. And I sat on them so I could see, because I couldn't see. And I wanted to see. And for the next hour and a half, this guy basically just told his story. That he was in prison, and he was lost, and he was evil. And basically, he was everything I was. And that he had an experience with Jesus. And that it changed his life. And then he went on and got out and did all the things. And I didn't don't get me wrong. At that point, I'm a skeptic. I mean, I'm still a skeptic. Like, if it's not real, if it ain't real, I ain't doing it. I don't know, it just kind of pierced me. But I heard every word he said. They did a thing like, would you like to come down here and make a decision for Jesus? And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing none of that. But I left, and I was depressed because I didn't get to say goodbye to my friends, but I had that guy's story. And it wasn't he didn't quote Bible scriptures or anything. He just told a story. Like, this is what happened to me. And I remember going back to the dorm. I couldn't sleep. I wrote in my journal that night. I mean, we read that earlier, my last little
right in front of me.
Little entry in my journal. I wrote a letter to my mom. I wrote a letter to my granny. And I think I wrote a letter to my cousin Lisa. And maybe my Aunt Glennis. I don't remember. And I was up till 2 or 3 that morning. Everybody was asleep. And I was just reflecting over the past, 4 years. How did I get here? I'm in the middle of nowhere in Florida. And I don't know what's next. And I was kind of nauseous, kind of worrying, but at the same time I had this weird some kind of hope. I don't know. I had hope. I knew that somehow there was something in the future for me, even though my reality was not telling me any of that.
Right.
Because at that time I still had 6 armed robberies out there. In all these counties, not just one. They only got me for Montgomery. But I knew there was all these others. If they could get me for Montgomery, they could get me for all of them. So I didn't know what my future was. But I remember barely being able to go to sleep that night. And then they woke me up at the crack of dawn. They wake when you're on an E.O.S. They want to get you early and out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they woke me up early, took a shower, packed up all my stuff. I actually gave away everything I had because I knew that they probably wouldn't let me take much stuff with me. And just that final walk, they took me from M-Dorm. M-Dorm's on the edge, the south end of the compound. So you have to basically walk through, past everything to get to the front part where the administration building is. And just that walk, and the sun was just barely up, and just thinking, gosh, all the life that I lived right there for all those years. And, the different person that I was now than I was when I came in. And then the people that I'd gotten close to and grown to love. And the friends that I made. And the influence of, the different cultures. Especially, the Hispanics. And, just everything. It, somehow I knew it, made me better. Even though it was a bad experience,
It changed you.
It did. I was different. I was not the little redneck kid from Phoenix City, Alabama when I left there. But then walking up to the front, then processing me through, and it was so fast. And I was like, how can this be so fast? As long as it took y'all to get me in here to lock me up forever, now y'all just going to let me out. And then getting to the visiting park, and I saw Edge. He worked in there. That was where he worked. And he was like, today's the big day, Jones. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not going home. They got a detainer on me in Montgomery. He was like, I know. He said, but everything's going to be all right. You have a bright future ahead of you. And I just want you to know that I will be calling Norma Jean to check up on you. And she's going to tell me everything. That's my mom's name. And she's going to tell me everything I need to know. And you're going to be all right. And I was just emotional. And then Miss Carol, the drug counselor that I was an assistant for that fired me, she was there, and she was so lame with her little words. Just oh, so you're going to jail somewhere else. Well, God bless you. And I just remember thinking, why are you even here? What are you doing here? What is your reason to be employed at B.C.I?
Well, it's just funny. Well, when you say that, it triggers. I mean, it just makes me think of you in the last 3-4 years, however long you were there, had experienced such change in so many ways. But you got to think of someone like her. I mean, this is true for all of us. That was her job. And I just wonder, like, probably life was pretty much the same for her
Yeah.
then as it was when you came in.
Yeah.
And so she didn't have a different lens, and you walked out with a different lens you came in with.
I did, but I didn't walk out. I always had the fantasy of walking out free to my mom. And I walked out of the gate into a professional inmate transporter. So when you're getting transferred state to state like that, it's like not the deputies that come and get you, but they have a company that does it. So they shackled my legs, and I had been there for like 3+ years, never been handcuffed, none of that. So you forget that. But then when they put that on you, you feel it. You're like, oh, Lord have mercy. So he cuffed up my feet, then he cuffed up my arms in front of me, not behind me, and then he let me out, and it was like this little. I hate to keep saying this, but it was like a little dog catcher van with bars in it, with the bench in there, and they throw you in there, and then they cuff you. They attach your handcuffs to something on the bench for some reason. I don't know why they do all that. But as we rode away, I was filled with, obviously with dread, but I had another thing that I'd never had happen to me before, and I've never had happen to me since then, is I was car sick, like throwing up car sick. And I was trying to like process like what's happening here. But I realized I've been here for 3 years and I've not left these 20 acres. I've never been in a car. Nothing. I've just been walking around because I've been in prison here. And just a weird feeling of the car sickness. Like, and it passed, but it was just like, it just like stood out to me. This is so odd, like so weird. But I was headed north to Montgomery, Alabama, and I was about to start over in my jail/prison experience. And I was feeling sorry for myself. I felt like it was unfair. But at the same time, I had to remind myself, this is what you did to get yourself here. So it's time to pay the piper. Whatever you need to face, you need to face it and deal with it. And I didn't know what was next, but I was scared. I was fearful. I was probably more worried about my mom and my granny than anybody, just because I didn't want to put them through this again. But it was definitely, well, here we go again. I made it through these past 4 years. I can make it through whatever's next. So, But the car sickness really colored that first hour or so in the van, because it was so. I've never been car sick, ever. And then since then, I never have been again. But it was something about the movement of the vehicle and just having been sedentary for so many years. I mean, I didn't stay there for 6 months. I'd been there for years and had never left that little acreage of prison compound. But I was headed to Alabama, and if we're doing like seasons for this podcast, this would probably be the end of season 1, if you want to call it that. I mean, I don't know how we're just telling the story, but this was definitely an end to a season. And I was getting ready to start a new season that in some ways would be beyond my wildest dreams, but then in other ways would be some of the worst things that anybody could ever face in their life. Like if I'd have known what I was heading into, I probably would have had not have any hope. But part of the process, part of the story. So here we go. We're going to Sweet Home Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama. Face the music, pay the piper.
Pay the piper. It's
If
crazy.
I'm going to dance, I got to pay the fiddler.
Crazy. I mean, to end this, just to say, in the beginning, you said it was a 45-day spree.
Yeah.
Of drugs, and then starting the armed robbery or the robberies or whatever.
Yeah.
So the 45-day spree has led to
At this point,
what feels like just ongoing consequence.
At this point, from the time I got arrested, it would have been 3 years and 6 months. So that would have been plus two months. So 3 years and 8 months later, I'm still dealing with this.
With no end in sight, really.
No, there was no. It was hopeless. It was a hopeless situation, and it would get more hopeless as I went forward because I would find out quickly. Alabama is a different world from Florida. In Florida, they at least care about you. In Alabama, they're just trying to manage. And you know, I'm an Alabamian. I love Alabama, but their prison system, their jail system is one of the worst in the nation. I think Louisiana's the only one that will probably be comparable to be worse. But I was getting ready to find out.
We'll hear about it. Okay.
Well, stay tuned. The next one, I'll tell you about my journey back. My journey, which I thought would be just like a drive from south of Orlando to Montgomery, Alabama, which was about 9-10 hours. Would end up being about 3 days before I got there. Didn't know that was coming. But stay tuned.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to the Straight Outta Prison podcast. For more, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Look up Straight Outta Prison podcast.
Yes, we have pictures and people of things that we talk about during each episode. I have really loved being able to connect people and their faces and names and some other things that we've talked about on this platform. So, Straight Outta Prison podcast, Facebook and Instagram. And if you'd like to support our show, check out our website, teamjones.co.com/podcast. Thanks, guys.
See you soon.